Again, good afternoon, everybody. My predecessor, Rabbi Shachtel, used to say anybody who's on time shouldn't be made late. So we'll begin on time. And as others find their way to their Zoom or to the table here, they'll join us. That's all. I'm delighted that you're here and thank you for joining on Zoom. I really love to teach this material, and last time was a wonderful beginning to introduce you to the richness of Midrash. Last time I really outlined what is halachic Midrash, what is agadic Midrash. We won't do that today, except to say that the Midrash today is not halachic. There's no interpretation of Torah that will lead us to some Jewish law or stricture that has to be observed. Rather, these Midrashim today are agadic. They help us to understand more about ourselves as Jews in relationship to God, in relationship to our community. So David has the text that he'll put up to share the screen. As we go into it, I'll tell you my agenda for today. I have an agenda, and my agenda is to share with you some simpler, easy to digest midrashim, and we'll spend the bulk of our time in one that I think is just amazing and profound. It'll take us some time to unpack it, but that's the fun of learning together and seeing just how deep and how far these texts can take us. So let's continue first with a blessing. We give thanks to God who commands us to participate and engage in the study of Torah. So we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Wonderful. Okay, so welcome, and let's jump right in. David, I don't know if the screen share is okay. And by the way, I'm so grateful David is here because in addition to the many of the hats he does wear, one of them is technology. And I would like to learn, but I'll have to wait for another day.
All in good time.
All in good time. So the text in front of us begins with Torah and then the rabbinic text. So we're going to take a look at Exodus chapter 28, verse 1, which I have on the page for you, and then the Midrash that follows from it. You should know that in the Torah, there are at least 36 specific places where there's a mention of dealing with the stranger around us. So 36, as you know, is double chai, double life, because 18 equates to the value of chai. Each Hebrew letter has a value, and chet and yud add up to 18. So the idea that it's mentioned 36 times is significant and shouldn't be lost on us, nor should this text. So in Torah, in Exodus 28, it says, "You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt." Now, on the surface, you'd say, okay, I'm not impressed yet because I know this, I get this, and I'm studying here at the table and on Zoom because I'm already a committed Jew who understands the relationship that we have to other people around us. But what the Midrash does is, even as the rabbis in their own time were very distant from the text of the Torah itself and the time of the departure from Egypt that God led the Israelites on, had to continually convey to their own community and their own time. Why is this important to us? And what is the communal and covenantal obligation that we continue to carry with us that should make it so important to us? So if they were writing in the first, second century, or maybe even older than that, we are more than 2,000 years away from such an exodus, 2,500 years. How do we continue to make it relevant and meaningful to us? So the Midrash teaches us, and it says, do not scold your neighbor with a fault which is also your own. Now, a few minutes ago, before we began, Warren said to me correctly that in this day and age, you wouldn't want to scold your neighbor with any fault because of road rage and tension and polarization. So we understand on the surface that scolding another person is it's a little risky. I'm not even sure the parents scold their children properly anymore today either. But this Midrash speaks about something that is important to all of us as a Jewish community. Do not scold your neighbor with a fault which is also your own. So let me ask you the question. What's the fault? What's the fault that they're identifying in this text, which is also our own? Arrogance? Well, the answer's right in front of you, so I just want to highlight it and lift it up off the page. What is the fault, the issue that we all carry with us?
We've all been a stranger at one time or another.
I can't hear you.
She said we've all been a stranger.
Yes, okay, thank you. We've all been a stranger. We are the stranger who was in Egypt, whom God led out with Moses' help. So that is the fault which is ours. Now you might say to yourself, I'm not a stranger. It's not my fault. Why is this my burden? One of the rabbis' hope was to teach us something that binds us together as a community, no matter when we live, no matter what generation we exist in. If we are a covenanted people, uniquely connected to God and uniquely connected to each other, then the fault which is always present in us, in every generation, is that we too were once strangers in the land of Egypt. And if this is the fault which we bear, and the burden that is ours, we also know that not only were we strangers, but we were redeemed from the land of Egypt. So in our own effort to enter the world in which we live, if we carry this fault with us, then we have no right and no privilege ever to scold someone else who finds himself in the same position that we were once in. So what the rabbis did was first to lay this on us to be sure that we understand where we came from, even though it's now more than 2,000 years later, and also to understand our obligation as people of the world who live with a specific covenant with God and our own Jewish community. So let me ask you how you react to this text. And if first, do you accept the obligation or the fact that we own this fault, this part of our own history today? And then if we do or don't, what's our obligation with it in our contemporary?
Rabbi, I'm having trouble with being a stranger as a fault, as a defect, or as a, I mean, I understand that it could be a burden, but I'm not quite sure I understand why it's, at least how I define fault.
So Jeffrey, let's it's only a translation, so let's maybe use some of your words. We're not saying that it's our fault. We are saying it's our past, it's part of our experience, and maybe if we use your word that it's actually a burden, we'll move beyond it. I'm not saying that it's our fault. We didn't create the problem, but it is something that lives in us. It's a part of our history from which we can never really be disconnected.
And also, why is it tied to Egypt? Since since Abraham came to, since God asked Abraham to come to Canaan,
Yeah,
and he was a stranger there too. Why is it? We've always been kind of strangers.
we always have been. I think that's an understatement. You're right. Because of the experience in Egypt was seminal to our formation as a community, as a people, and ultimately what led us to Sinai to create a covenant with God. And we're going to get to that later too. There's no doubt Abraham went in his direction, Moses went in his direction, often because of famine, because of regional issues. But the seminal moment in our Jewish history was not just Abraham leaving his father's house to a place that God would show him, but what brought us together as an as a people, was the exodus from Egypt. Yeah, Ed.
I always looked at this as, and one of my grandfathers made the comment that he was an immigrant from Europe and he was a stranger in the United States. Right. And to understand that connection of in many generations, we were strangers in a strange land.
Absolutely. So it's a wonderful contemporary example. I call it contemporary because given our history, it's much newer and richer and we can relate to it. The fact is that many of us who are not first generation, who really understand what it means to be an American, today I had to fill out a form it was a census form, a renewal of a passport form, and you put down your nationality or your, origin. And I'm wondering, what's my origin? We don't put down Eastern European. We don't put down Russian. Wait a minute. I'm an American. I'm an American.
Don't even
And our parents, grandparents, and before that really didn't always have the privilege to choose those words as easily as we do. So our tradition, whether this is an ancient Midrash or not, the fact that we're Jewish ties us to this origin. It's what we all have in common, that this burden, this experience historically is still ours. And because of it, we have no right or privilege to fault or scold a neighbor with something that we own. We had in our own background too. So it's a profound midrash, I think, especially in these times when our own country is grappling with comprehensive immigration reform and the issues on the border. It's not to tell you what the answer is. It's not to tell you how to resolve it. It is to tell you that we have to begin with some empathy and compassion for the position that people find themselves in, because historically it was our position too. I think I see a hand. Dina?
Yes. As you were talking, and I thought about recent, as in the past 10 years, political events, and even going back to the 1930s, anytime there's been a movement in this country to say, we're the real Americans, and those people who arrived more recently than I did is what it boils down to, are the strangers. It's the exact opposite of the message you're talking about, that we need to have as a very personal experience, even though it was my great-grandparents and some of my grandparents who were the immigrants. And even if I was a Mayflower descendant, that was a refugee who came to the United States to save his life.
Right.
So it's the exact opposite of this idea of the newcomer is not as worthwhile as the person who's been here a long time.
Yeah. Dina, thank you. We have a lot of mixed messages in this country. When something is new and improved, we run for it. When something's under new management, we get all excited. But the fact is, in Judaism, sometimes the older it is, the more precious it is. So this idea of that we shouldn't scold a neighbor with a burden or an experience which is also our own. It is all about the immigrant experience. We were once strangers in the land, and we are no longer strangers in the land as long as we maintain our foothold here. But it also leads to other ideas. It isn't only the ancient message. I think for a contemporary sermon, we might say, how do we create, as Warren warned us, against polarization or scolding a neighbor because of the risky outcomes? Actually, the fact is, how do we create civility in conversations over difficult subjects between neighbors, friends, or family members for that matter? It is possibly by recognizing that we're not perfect and we have faults within ourselves or burdens that we carry because of our experiences, where we can't always point a finger at somebody and blame them for something that we either experienced ourselves, overcame, or at a minimum, at least understand and empathize with others. Barbara, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I wish I had kept this in mind more often. I have a neighbor who will not speak to me
Oh, goodness.
or allow me on their property.
Wow.
They got upset because they referred a roofer to me who handed me a copy of the New Testament. And I told them I didn't care for that. And then I made a great mistake. I really am at fault here. They put some sign in their yard that politicians come and go, but Wu-Tang is forever.
But what is
And I don't think anyone in this room besides,
the rock
what's
group?
forever? Yes,
The what?
but I didn't know who they were.
It's
They
the
are
Rabbis.
actually a pop group.
Pop group.
And they
Wu-Tang
live
Clan.
forever because as one of the people ages out, they bring someone else in, but I didn't know. I'd never heard of
What
them.
word are you saying?
Wu-Tang.
Wu-Tang.
Wu-Tang Clan.
I didn't know that.
I had
They're
never
great.
heard of them, and I looked them up
I
on
listen to
Google, and
radio.
it,
Do?
yeah, I looked them up on Google, and it talked about their radical Muslim roots.
Oh, oh.
And I texted them, have you become, more Muslim? And I just said, I don't understand this. Can you explain it to me? But once my children explained to me how I screwed up, I immediately said, I am so in the wrong. My children have explained this to me. I should never have said that. They never forgave me. I apologized 3 times in writing, once in person. I even sent them a Christmas. She said I was the only religious bigot she'd ever known.
Oh.
And I can see how she would get that.
But your effort to apologize.
Oh, I even
In a
said
Jewish
that-
context, you are cleared and absolved with your, but.
And they should have passion for goodness.
But yeah.
Well,
But I have to tell you, this is my biggest flaw, because I tend to speak too quickly. And I think that's what it's telling us.
You were fine.
Shut
well,
up. Think about
I'm
it.
glad the text speaks to you.
It does.
And however we might interpret it individually is one thing, but collectively, we have this shared burden or
Well-
experience in history that does cause us to see ourselves where we should and also where others are and aiming to be. Yeah.
And I think that we need to remember that people, no matter what you do, they will think of you as representing all of our people.
Oh, there's no question about it.
And so Jews are religious.
Yeah, I know. I deal with it every day. I'm just keeping my eye on the watch because we have
I am.
only till 1:00 and this could take us all day. So the next text that I want to share with you is a nice one too. It's nice to go to a Torah text that is already familiar to you. This comes from Exodus 15. This is from the portion called Shirat Hayam, or the Song of the Sea. So the Israelites have come through their Exodus experience and they're singing this victory song. So in this particular text, it says, "Who is like you, O Lord, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness?" So that's in the Hebrew, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, Mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh. We sing it all the time in services. It's part of every liturgical experience that we share. It goes on, "Awesome in splendor, working wonders. You put out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love, you lead the people you redeemed. In your strength, you guide them to your holy abode." So the rabbis jumped on this too, and they wanted to understand more deeply, what is God's strength? It's almost as if they really already understand what is God's love. It says in the second to last verse, "In your love, you lead the people you redeemed." We get it. But in your strength, you guide them to your holy abode. So in the Midrash, it teaches, in your strength, you guide them. What does it mean? It says, for the sake of the Torah, which they were destined to receive, for your strength here is but a designation for the Torah. As in the passage, the Lord will give strength unto his people. So it's a beautiful midrash, which unpacks something which I hope that you'll take home with you too, which is when God leads us in God's strength to God's holy abode. That is, the whole journey from Egypt was meant to bring us to Mount Sinai so that we could receive the Torah and enter into an eternal covenant with God. And by God's strength, God led us there. So the rabbis asked, what's the source of God's strength? Well, you might say, well, God is God. I don't know. It's titanium, plutonium, whatever it might be. Whatever is the strongest element on earth, it must be God's. What enormous strength. But the rabbi said that in your strength is nothing but a designation for Torah. Torah is God's strength. That's amazing. The rabbinic creative mind is really amazing to tell us that the strength that God uses is Torah. And what did God do with God's own source of strength, God's Torah?
Gave it to us.
Gave it to us. Gave it to us. And if it's God's strength, now it's our strength. First, how do you respond to such a gift?
We try to live up to it.
Try to live up to it and cherish it.
Gratitude.
Gratitude.
turn it over and over again.
There you go. Donald says you turn it and turn it over and over again. That's a quote from the Mishnah, from Pirkei Avot, that when we have the Torah, we continually to literally unroll it and turn it over and over again to wax gray and old over it, as the text says. So the idea that a weakened people coming out of Egypt with nothing, a stranger, looking to eventually arrive at the promised land, which God had promised to our ancestors. Where does the strength come from? We have to nourish ourselves physically. We have to accommodate our emotional needs. But our spiritual and religious hopefulness comes from a source, which is God's source too, which is Torah. It's remarkable. So I learned from a teacher a long time ago who put it this way. For Christians, they might hear it put this way, that God so loved the people that God gave him his only son. Okay? We hear that. But Judaism would say, God so loved the Israelite people that God gave the Israelite people God's Torah. So when others claim something unique and holy for themselves, I would say that God's own strength, God's Torah, is quite a unique gift for all of us. So it is our strength. And in times like our Israelite ancestors, to receive God's strength and the Torah, and we received it at Sinai, it's a good segue to our next text, but it also should be something very meaningful and personal to each of you. That as we look for our own source of strength today, again, you can look at any infomercial you want or any source of promise and hope that anybody aims to deliver to you. But as a Jew, we're taught not to follow false prophets. We're taught not to follow somebody who says the end is near, follow me. That's a time to turn around and go the other way. In our Judaism, Torah is a source of strength. It's not because we're strong enough to carry it. We're strong enough to bear it in our heart, in our soul, in our hands. So as we turn to the Deuteronomy, which we'll come to in a moment, we also read that it's already in you. It says, "Beficha bilvavcha la'asoto." The Torah is already in your mouth to speak of it. It's in your heart to understand it, and it's in your hands to do it. So it's a wonderful lesson is, Ed, you find your strength as we find our way and overcome the challenges of a pandemic or the circumstances we face in a world today. We can find strength in lots of places, but we cannot forget that the greatest strength and the source of our strength is Torah itself.
The comment in the chat that the Torah is what has preserved the Jewish people.
Yes, the Torah is preserved. So I mentioned a Torah study last week that even as many times as the Jews have been driven from land to land, and even as you commented how we arrived eventually in America, the Golden Medina, as our ancestors called the land where the streets were paved in gold, they really thought that. They were very disappointed when they arrived at the Lower East Side, but they really felt that this was the place to fulfill their life's dreams. And so as people were driven over time, they left behind synagogues and buildings and homes and businesses and a lot of material goods. But the one thing that the Jews always carried with them uniquely compared to other peoples who are vanished from the earth is Torah. They brought their intellect with them. They brought what they studied and learned and transmitted by oral transmission and written transmission. So we were able to survive throughout the generations because we had an oral story and we had our intellect that we brought with us. Because the synagogue was burned, God forbid, was not the end of the Jewish people. Even if the Torah were desecrated, it was never the end of the Jewish people. We didn't rely on those things to be Jewish. It was here, and it was here in order to do it. So it's a brilliant and inspiring way to think of our future. We still need Jews to carry it, but what we carry makes a difference. Comments or questions from those on Zoom?
Yeah. Continuing the same theme, and I'm plagiarizing heavily from Louisa, whose last name I can't recall, but she's a regular at Torah study, and she has espoused these arguments and similar ideas. The Torah contains the blueprints to build an entire culture There's a legal system. If you don't have a secular legal system, there's a legal system in Leviticus. So culture and practice and the importance of community before you even get into Talmud. I mean, this just reinforces what you just said, but Torah is the entire toolkit to preserve the community. So it makes sense. And there were plenty of people who memorized sections. So when the Torah scroll either was too expensive or too far away and so on, the words were still with us and the ideas were still with us.
Correct, Dina. Absolutely. And there is a Midrash that the rabbis teach that the Torah was a blueprint for the creation of the world. We can unpack that another day, but the idea that the Torah was the blueprint for the creation of the world does give rise to many of the things that you observe. Our judicial system, our ethical system and expectations and much more. Very good. Thank you for bringing it up. So we're going to shift gears because I think this is going to take a lot of time. And I don't want you to hesitate to ask questions or put them in the chat because it's all worthwhile. So we're going to turn now to, I think it's, I want to make sure that you're showing the right. Yeah, you are. Right. Okay. So we're going to look at two different Torah portions. One is Genesis 22 from Parashat Vayera. If you remember what Genesis 22 is about, it's the Akedah, it's the binding of Isaac's story. It's the story that we read on Rosh Hashanah when Abraham brings his son Isaac to Mount Moriah and places him on the altar. And Isaac is fearful. He says, where's the offering? Where's the sacrifice? And Abraham says to his son Isaac, God will see to the sacrifice. And they go up to the mountain and Abraham ties him there. We're also going to look at Deuteronomy 29, Parashat Nitzavim. And this is the portion that we read on Yom Kippur. So keep in mind, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, High Holy Days, times when we highlight very important themes for our Jewish lives. And in terms of the text, we go from Genesis to Deuteronomy, the beginning of the Torah to the end of the Torah. So let's get this text under our belt because I don't want to assume that everybody remembers everything from these portions. So Genesis 22 verses 1 through 3, this is all we have to read of it. It says, sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test. He said to him, Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And he said, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. So early next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him two of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which God had told him. That's all we have to read of it, because what we want to identify is the role that Abraham plays. And I underlined for you, he split the wood for the burnt offering. So Abraham is a wood chopper in this particular category. Okay? Hold that in your mind. Abraham he's wielding the axe and he is the wood chopper. Let's go to Deuteronomy 29. I hope you recognize some of this. It means you're listening in services or just good students. But we read it every year to be sure that you hear it. So Deuteronomy 29, beginning in verse 9, says, you stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God, your tribal heads, your elders, and your officials, all the men of Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from wood chopper to water drawer, to enter into the covenant of the Lord your God, which the Lord your God is concluding with you this day. I hope those words are familiar and resonate with you, because on the surface, we should first point out that when we read this on Yom Kippur, the purpose of reading it is to say, you stand here, all of you, this day. Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnechem. You're all standing here, whether you were standing there that day at Sinai or not. We are all part of the same eternal covenant. And further in Deuteronomy 29, it says, I make this covenant with you who are standing here this day, and with those of you who are not standing here this day. And we are the ones who are not standing there this day, and might even be with those who are not part of the covenant or even born into the covenant, but eventually will find their way. So this is an eternal covenant, the same one that God made with our ancestors. So key word here too is underlined. It says from wood chopper to water drawer. Now, if the wood chopper is Abraham, who's the water drawer? So let's continue reading on the page. And we're going to be reading from 1 Kings chapter 18, beginning in 17 through 39. It's a contest between Baal and Adonai, which is conducted by King Ahab and the prophet Elijah. So this may be familiar to you too, but if not, we'll read it and we'll understand it. So it says, when Ahab caught sight of Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" We always get this label. It never fails. In ancient times and modern times, we're troublemakers. I don't get it. So Elijah retorted, "It is not I who have brought trouble on Israel, but you and your father's house by forsaking the commandments of the Lord and going after the Baalim." So Baalim are false idols. That's what they are. "Now summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, together with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, that is, who are maintained by Jezebel, who eat at Jezebel's table." So Elijah's setting up a contest. Ahab sent orders to all the Israelites and gathered the prophets at Mount Carmel. Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long will you keep hopping between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. And if Baal, follow him." But the people answered him not a word. Okay, great contest. Then Elijah said to the people, "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, while the prophets of Baal are 450. So this is great. So Elijah says, "I'm the only prophet of Adonai. I'm just one person." Baal has 450 prophets. So he's setting it up. Everybody thinks they know where the answer and the winner is going to come from. So we go on to the text and it says, "Let 2 young bulls be given to us. Let them choose one bull, cut it up, and lay it on the wood, but let them not apply fire. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and will not apply fire." Okay, so far so good, we're even. "You will then invoke your God by name, and I will invoke the Lord by name." Literally, "and it shall be." And let us agree, the God who responds with fire, that one is God. And all the people answered, "Very good." All right, so the rules are set. There's a bull over here and a bull over there. They're all set evenly, and we're going to see who comes down to consume this bull with fire. Is it Baal or Adonai? So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one bull and prepare it first, for you are the majority. Invoke your God by name, but apply no fire." They took the bull that was given them, they prepared it, and invoked Baal by name from morning until noon, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no sound, and none who responded. So they performed a hopping dance about the altar that had been set up. Now, hopping dance is just a translation, but you can imagine they went nuts, whatever their ritual dance might have been, to evoke some response. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come closer to me." And all the people came closer to him. He repaired the damaged altar of the Lord. Then Elijah took 12 stones corresponding to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come. "Israel shall be your name." And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Okay, so Elijah's up to something. Now he laid out the wood, and he cut up the bull and laid it on the wood, and he said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it over the burnt offering and all of the wood." Then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. "Do it a third time," he said, and they did it a third time. The water ran down around the altar, and even the trench around it was filled with water. Did we hear water before? So what we were looking for the
Water bear was.
the water bear, the water jar, right? Okay, so we're making those connections. But now what's significant?
Wait,
Bear.
what about Rebecca?
Wait, no, we're not, this is,
Okay.
I appreciate the insertion. She has no place here. So it goes on to say, when it was time to present the meal offering, the prophet Elijah came forward and said, "O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God." And what happened next? It says, "Then fire from the Lord descended and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the earth, and it licked up the water that was in the trench." an amazing sight. I don't know why Hollywood hasn't made a movie out of it. It's really something. So let's lay out some of the details that we know. So we know that Abraham is regarded as the wood chopper. It's very clear. Why is Elijah now becoming connected with the role of water drawer? What did he do?
Well, you had the water poured over everything, so if there was any spark or fire or anything, it would not, it would turn it out.
Right. And what made so the fire came down and consumed all of it. It licked up all the water, even out of the trench. So it must have been a pool of water and everything else. And the burnt offering was burnt up. So this looks a little strange, doesn't it? So what did he accomplish?
There was no doubt.
It was the awesomeness of his power.
Awesome power, no doubt. And it contradicted nature. Usually water extinguishes fire, and it shouldn't have happened. So again, that's why I say it would have made a great Hollywood movie, because this is the stuff of miracles. When we contradict nature as it ought to go, that's when we stand in awe of such things. And so the people responded appropriately. All right, so it says on the last part of it, when they saw all this, all the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, "The Lord alone is God, the Lord alone is God." All right, now before we get to the last piece of the text that's there, we'll leave it alone for a minute. What else do we know about Elijah? He's not just a water drawer as we find it here. Let's learn a little bit more from your experience about Elijah before we conclude with this.
He doesn't die.
Right.
He's brought to heaven in a chariot.
Yeah. And when are we
Waiting for him
supposed to
back.
experience?
Passover. Waiting for him.
So why are we opening a door for Elijah?
Waiting for his return.
Why? What is he coming to tell us?
Quarter of the Messiah.
That's right. So Elijah's coming to tell us about the time when the Messiah is coming. And every year we open that door, hoping that Elijah will come this time.
And get the girl married that's not.
Yeah.
For some reason, how did that happen?
So Elijah is also the protector of all children. So if you've ever attended a bris, there's also what's called Kisei Shel Eliyahu, Elijah's chair. And when the baby is brought into the room, the moil will take the baby and just touch the baby to the chair, because Elijah is present at every circumcision as a protector of children. So the chair of Elijah is there, and that kind of protection is inherent in the ceremony and the hopefulness for the child's future. So Elijah is really a forebear of everything good, messianic time. Now, just as a side note, sometimes it comes up in these conversations. When we think about Messiah, we get a little concerned. We don't talk about it much in Judaism, really, because we are always focused philosophically on the here and now. We're not living, waiting just for the world to end or for some Messiah to come. And I don't have to go into the story of Honi and about the old man who's planting a fruit tree. The point is that if somebody comes and tells you to stop doing what you're doing, the Messiah has come, you'll turn around and say, "Excuse me, if it's really the Messiah, he'll be there after I finish the work that I need to do," right? So you don't have to finish planting your fruit tree for the future. But the point is here that Elijah stands for something in the future that is yet to be. It is a messianic age or a messianic time. So as Reformed Jews, we're hopeful in two ways. We can be hopeful for a messianic individual to come, a descendant of David, Elijah coming to tell us that he's here. But more likely, because we're Reformed Jews and we like to be rational, reasonable, and a little more scientific and objective about things, we say that we're participants, as we are in a covenant, to create what might be a messianic time. So rather than working and waiting for somebody to come, we are all collectively responsible for the messianic time we hope to see. That's why we've lifted up in the Reform movement, perhaps ad nauseum, but we've said, tikkun olam, we're going to repair the world. All right, not tomorrow, not the next day, lots of things to do. But we can't desist from trying to make a difference in the future of the world. So that's really our drive for social justice, which comes from the prophetic tradition, is really to contribute to the well-being of the world, not waiting for it to come to us, but rather for us to bring it about more quickly. So the role of Elijah is about the future and the hopefulness of our children and a time of Messiah. So when we read this portion on Yom Kippur, that all of you stand here this day from wood chopper to water drawer, what the text is telling us is that the wood chopper is represented by Abraham, the first Jew, and we relate to the experience of him and his son who almost was sacrificed on Mount Moriah, which we read on Rosh Hashanah. But from the wood chopper to the water drawer was Elijah. And so we come from the very beginning of our Jewish roots. And where do we hope to be? It's in the guise and in the position that Elijah represents for us. So it's from a point of origin to a point of something well in the future. Barbara?
I'm surprised,
Yeah.
really, that they associated water drawer with Elijah, because this is that he had the other people draw the water. They didn't say that he drew the water.
Yeah, well, I don't think they were being as specific as you're being, who brought it. I think Elijah probably didn't lift a lot of things on his own.
But once again, 3 was the magic number. They did it 3 times.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. 3 is always ample. 3 is always ample. So 3 times. So it's a marvelous, when you come to high holidays and you hear, when you read the story again, that all of us were standing from wood chopper to water drawer. We know that others were listed, from tribal heads, the men, the women, the children, and so forth. But from wood chopper to water drawer is not just the lowliest roles and jobs within the community, but it actually represented time and hopefulness. So the wood chopper and the water drawer represent something that we are truly a part of as well. So before we read the last feelings, any reaction from the Zoom room?
Yeah,
Larry,
I did go off on a tangent, and I wrote it mostly in the chat.
Oh.
But I actually was in the location where this was supposed to have happened in Israel on tour. And one of the members of our group, who was a geologist, looked around at the local rocks. And he said, oh yeah, pouring the water was necessary because then you release a settling gas. And then Elijah just had to accidentally, on purpose, sneak in a spark, and you'd get what is described. And I elaborated in the chat what implications I see from that. Our tour guide actually used the word blasphemy. She, as a non-Reformed Jew, she felt saying it was not a miracle, and it didn't happen simply because God pointed the finger at the altar to flame, but because a human had been used as an agent, it made it less miraculous. And I say it makes it more miraculous for God to use humans as agents.
Leave it to a secular Israeli to destroy the whole point of this story. And, it's as Abraham Joshua Heschel said in the 20th century. We can ask the question, did it really happen the way it's told to us? And that's not the right question. Because the question is, something happened. What happened? And this is the way it's been recorded and told to us. So it's a fantastic story, and I don't need to know whether it really happened that way or not. Just like the burning bush story. Was it some optical illusion or something? It doesn't matter. The story comes down to us, and because the story is still with us, it takes on a sacred nature, because it's informed us in the Midrashic Agadic way to lift up the seminal theories and thoughts and hopes of our people for all time. And that's why the Midrash goes so deeply to say, wait a minute, it's not just 2 lowly people at the end of the line in a community, but the wood chopper and the water drawer really represent the whole continuum of our people through history. We have Abraham at the beginning and Elijah somewhere down the line. And that's fascinating to see us, not that we're entering the year 2022 or that we're now in the year 5782, but rather we're on a continuum that makes our Jewish history seem much shorter than it really is. Because what happened 1,000 years ago, as we say in God's eyes, happened yesterday. That's the way it goes. Yeah, Miriam.
When I used to teach mythology, and I used to say that a myth is realer than real and truer than true, whether it happened or not. Because it becomes part of the culture's, I guess, safe place to be, to understand. And I also feel that the story of Elijah and the water, the fire taking up the water, has something to do with the questions we all are wont to ask periodically is, how do I know there's a God?
Yeah.
And if you know that story, then you say, well, whether it happened or not, something happened that proved to my ancestors that there is a God.
Yeah, and what I often say, very much like you are expressing, Miriam, is that as Jews, we are part of this covenant, this eternal covenant. And so if I ask myself, like you might ask yourselves, what are my stories? What's my literature? Where do I go to find intrigue, insight, and meaning? I don't go anywhere but my Torah. And by Torah, Milton Steinberg wrote in his book, Basic Judaism, that Torah is really understood two ways. In the restricted definition of Torah, it's the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But the general definition of Torah is anything that grows out of the Torah itself. So Midrash, as we're studying, it's Torah too, because what is at the root of this Midrash? Torah, right? So anything that we interpret, experience, and understand is our Torah. That's my literature. That's where I'm going to find my sacred stories, my sacred lessons, my hopefulness for the future. It's not in the New Testament. It's not in the Quran. It's not in other literature. We can learn from all of it. But what is mine is my Torah with a little t or a capital T.
I mean, when we had Richard Elliott Freeman, who wrote, about the Exodus, I loved the title. It was, Did It Happen? But why is it important?
Right.
And that's to me, as a modern Jew,
Absolutely.
that's what's, why
Absolutely.
is it important?
Right. There's a colleague of mine whose name I will not mention, who said, there's no evidence the Exodus actually happened. And I want to say, who cares?
Yeah,
Who cares?
exactly.
He actually told me that
Yeah.
there is now solid proof that it never happened. And I said, it doesn't matter, we're
Something
still gonna
happened.
have past.
Something happened. The story is told, and it's so integral to our identity as Jews, which is why the very first Midrash that I shared with you is we cannot escape the story that has come down to us. That's a part of who we are.
Yeah.
So the very end of the text then, I put in Hebrew and English because, it's not my favorite part, but it's certainly the ultimate moment on Yom Kippur when we stand facing the Holy Ark. And now the new prayer book lays it all out for us to say. And we say, Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim, Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim. We say it, I don't know how many times, like 7 times we counted. I'm counting on my finger, but you can't see my fingers counting in the book to be sure that I've said it 7 times. But when this happened, when Elijah won the contest and God did consume the water, the wood, and the bull offering, the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, the Lord alone is God, the Lord alone is God, Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim, Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim. And we say it on Yom Kippur at the end of the day. If you've ever been to Nila services, now next year you have to be at Nila. Because we stand facing the ark, and as we come to the conclusion, there's a crescendo. The music and our voices in English and Hebrew start quietly, and then it builds up until we're just joyfully bellowing Adonai Hu Ha-Elohim, Adonai is God, and then a segue, and David blows the Tekiah Gedolah, the great Tekiah, then we close the ark of benediction, and then it's time for breakfast. But we don't finish the day of Yom Kippur without exclaiming what the Israelites exclaimed as Elijah proved that Adonai is God against and in front of all other gods that might be worshipped. So it's a magnificent text that, as you can see, is not necessarily linear in its approach, but as the rabbis do, I'm not sure if you know this, but the rabbis, when they write their Midrash, they don't really read the whole Hebrew Bible chronologically. They don't say, I can't say this because it happened before this, and I can't find the proof text for that because it happened in a different time. anything in the Bible is fair game. So they create this masterful story that I just presented to you in a way to show how they can pull down these bits of evidence to demonstrate a continuum of history, expectations for the future. And our hopefulness is not in one verse or one Facebook posting or one, calendar page filled with philosophy. It's as Jews looking towards a future that we participate in creating. And we do it because we believe, or at least we wrestle to believe, that Adonai hu ha-Elohim, that Adonai is the one God. Reactions or comments? For those of you who have been to Nila, perhaps, and have said those words with us, now you know more than many other people who will be there next year. I can't, who is it?
Susie.
Susie, there you are.
Can you?
You're on mute.
You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you. Rabbi, what happened to the Babylus when the fire it came down and all of this happened? What did they start to embrace God, or did they leave?
No, typically, in many of the stories, they're wiped out and they're gone. So the reason we don't hear about Baalists today or the gods of Baal is because they're destroyed and they perished. And King Ahab and Jezebel go away. They're part of the, in every one of these stories, there are victors and there are losers. And so the reason we have these stories is because we are the victors. My mother doesn't like these stories very much because she said, why is it that the Israelites are going into these places on God's command to destroy everybody in front of them? But you've got a point. But in our times, we're more sensitive to it. But these are in effect war stories. These are victory stories that are told and written because my God is stronger, my army is bigger, my people are wealthier. That's just the way it goes. And these are now biblical stories because they have become part of our sacred literature.
I mean, Hanukkah was a military victory.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Hanukkah was
That was
a military
clear.
victory. Right.
But we don't talk about the.
We don't. And look, but the Greek power, although there's still Greece and the Greek people, but Greek power ended. Roman power ended. And throughout history, the Jews continue to prevail. So the fact that Israel, the land of Israel, is only 70 odd years old is minuscule in the scheme of history, but a miracle in and of itself. Well, we have a few minutes left, and I knew we would have a few minutes left, so I have another text for you. And this will round out our hour together. I really like this one too. It's not so much a midrash as it is a commentary, but that's okay. I'll take a little liberty. So in Parshat Vayeshev in Genesis 37, this is the portion where Joseph's brothers are very jealous, and Joseph's brothers report to their father Jacob about Joseph, who's arrogant and full of himself, a coat of many colors, the whole story. You know it from Broadway and from being familiar with it. So we wrestled with it because it is about sibling rivalry and the role of Jacob, the parent. And there's a lot of reasons we can sit around here and decide whether Jacob was a good parent or not. But the commentators took it up for themselves. So Rashi, whose full name is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki and was from 11th century France, cites this verse. So his brothers were wrought up at him, and his father kept the matter in mind. In Hebrew, shamar et hadavar, he kept the matter in mind. So we all do that sometimes, truthfully. We all keep certain things in mind. We don't rush to judgment. We collect evidence and data. We keep the matter in mind. We see where it's going. But why? What is the intention? What's behind his reason for not jumping to his children's defense because their other brother Joseph was being so obnoxious? So Rashi says, he awaited and looked forward to the time when this would come to pass. That is, everything that Joseph aimed to be or claimed would happen through the dreams that he interpreted for his father was something that Jacob wanted to keep in mind and wait to see if it would come to pass. But what the rabbis really were saying was that when Jacob hesitated, unlike his children who were being rather swift to judgment was that he was actually not only being patient, but faithful. Jacob actually believed if we let this play out and Joseph's dreams really meant something, that it would play out in the way exactly it was supposed to happen. So this is actually, when we keep a matter in mind, we're not doing it because we want to jump to a conclusion or condemn somebody. We're actually being hopeful that maybe this will have a good outcome. We're not ready to make a judgment. So then it goes on, and his father kept the matter in mind. He remembered it because he thought that the dream reflected what in fact would occur. So the father, the elder, had a little more sechel, a little more wisdom and reason to be patient. In fact, it says, his father was looking forward to the fulfillment of Joseph's dream. And then the statement is reflected in the Talmud, which teaches that a person may be jealous of everyone except his students and his children. So in Judaism, we know where it comes from, that in fact, we want our children to do better than we do. And we want our students, who are our mentees, to become even greater than we are. So the Talmud gives us a reason, the underpinnings for Jacob's behavior. It isn't that Jacob was not listening to his other children. It isn't that Jacob necessarily favored Joseph over his other children, or maybe he should have scolded Joseph, but because the Talmud makes clear what Jacob helps us know, that he was hopeful that Joseph's gifts to interpret the dreams would actually come true and be favorable in the end for everybody involved. But it also teaches us that, maybe even in counseling or understanding our own relationship to children or students, we want them to do better than we do. And we're not permitted to be jealous of them. We can be jealous of others. That's another issue, another problem. But of our students who are like our children and our children who are our own, we can't be jealous. So let's go back to the room. Any reaction to it or comments?
Well,
Yeah.
Jacob has a history of being passive. When in the Diener experience, when his sons killed off all those people, he said,
Right.
people aren't going to like us, we need to move. He didn't say,
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And Jacob is known as, in Hebrew, Ish Ohalo. He was the man of the tent. His brother Esau was the man of the field. So Jacob was passive. But I think what the rabbis were trying to do here, if I can infer a little bit, is they were trying to lift him up.
Jacob.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was the father of 12 nations. So they want to lift him up and show that he actually had some insight that wasn't necessarily apparent to us in the Torah.
And tomorrow, when we discuss Joseph and Jacob with David, I'll let my hostilities of Jacob go out, how much I disagree with Rashi.
Yeah. Now here's the joy of Midrash, though, is that there are multiple opinions. So it isn't linear. It isn't, this is the only Midrash, this is just one. And the rabbis themselves dared themselves with questions and pushing the envelope. So you push David tomorrow. Yeah, Dina?
Yeah, well, I have been known for my negative opinion about Jacob because I don't think he ever did stop being, I don't think he ever matured past the conniving, devious stage. However, that is very consistent with this Midrash from Sanhedrin that you just quoted. It is actually a positive interpretation of human nature. And I use envious rather than jealous, and that's another whole discussion. But it's impossible to be, or it is unwise to be envious of the accomplishments of your children and students, because their accomplishments are a reflection on what a great parent and teacher you were, which is why I say Jacob, if Joseph turns out to rule all of Egypt, Jacob's going to take it as confirmation of what a wonderful father he was.
Yeah.
And I think that
that's my
when
son.
we talk about putting a positive spin on negative characteristics, this is the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I think the rabbis in the Talmud were simply trying to lift up Jacob and to put around him a little bit of a fence so we could see some quality coming out of him at a very.
But I think in this case, he actually deserves it. He does deserve a little halo. Because he
Then you're
is
coming
holding
around.
back and waiting to have something reflect well on him.
Perfect. I'm going to quote you, Dina. Any others? All right. Well, listen, you're magnificent. Thank you for joining today. Our hour is up. And we got it all in and all done. And I think we have another date coming up.
We do. It's going to be in March, though.
Oh, in March.
We have March, April, and May with Rabbi Lyon. In January and in February, the second Thursday of each month, we have adult education sponsored programming, one related to the Southern Jewish experience, and the second in February relating to Musar and what Musar education is. And we'll have some of our Musar practitioners talking with us about Musar and why we should maybe get more involved with that kind of learning. Also, this Sunday is our next Israel Advocacy Committee program, educating ourselves about Israel and the UAE and the Abraham Accords and things that are happening between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Gilad Karni and Henrik Zimmerman Ben Arosh, both of whom live in Israel, will be joining us live from Jerusalem as we experience them and they experience us here in the boardroom as they talk to us more about this partnership and what they're doing. It's Sunday morning at 11 a.m.
Oh, Sunday.
Come at my house.
What time is it?
Perfect.
Good night.
Well, friends, I'm sorry we won't study Midrash together until March, but I'll be doing Torah study, and there's so much adult education going on in the congregation, thanks to David and the Adult Education Committee and many others. So I can't say Happy Hanukkah. I can't say Merry Christmas. Just enjoy the holiday season and good health.
There you go.
Good health.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Secular New Year. Yeah, there you go.
Happy